This will be the final post that I make from town. In fact, it likely will be the final thing that's ever posted or transmitted from this town. They're getting ready to wipe it completely off the face of the earth. I don't know exactly how, but after today, I don't know what to believe. And that's saying something after the last 2 days in this hellhole. So much has happened today. So many things that have left Aubrey and I both confused, torn apart, and, for me at least, angry. But I'll get to that in a second. First off, thank you again to the people who gave us as much advice as they could. It was, again, invaluable to say the least. When today started, especially after, well, we'll get to that. I felt almost completely hopeless. But the things you guys instructed us to do stayed stuck in the back of our minds, and we're poised to try and escape soon as the sun finally goes down. But until that moment, I'll tell you about what happened today. When the alarm on the wind-up clock we'd brought downstairs went off, and we both woke up, the first thing we did was to check my post to see what was said. Looking at the comments, we grabbed a pad of paper lying on the desk next to the ham radio and began writing out a list of things we might need. Aubrey said that since her parents were avid campers, a lot of the survival gear and camping equipment was stored in their garage. Sure enough, when we checked, we found heavy-duty sleeping bags, flashlights, iodine tablets for purifying water, as well as 3 parkas for winter hiking, and boots. We took all of it and moved into the dining room near the back door, packing as much as we could into 2 camping backpacks we found. We also took the large map of town on the wall downstairs and folded it away, just in case we needed it. With the sun rising high in the sky, we then braved the roaming gangs of affected to make a mad dash back to the library to see if, like one of you suggested, there might be a map of the sewers or mine shaft that we could use. We didn't see the sheriff on our trek down and back, but we still could occasionally hear the siren of his cruiser a few blocks away, along with a few gunshots. Thankfully, I also didn't see the horde that my mother, or what used to be my mother, was a part of. When we got to the library, we found that leaving had been a smart choice. The large wooden double doors had been broken in, and the inside turned upside down. Books and computer parts strewn about everywhere, and all the windows had been busted out. Going back to the records room, we began opening and closing drawers, searching for anything that could help. After a few minutes, I heard Aubrey let out a small laugh of relief. "Eddie, look at this!" she exclaimed, then spread the large, rolled-up paper out onto a half-destroyed table. It was an old survey map, the date in the upper right-hand corner from the early 60s, bearing the name and the crest of the old mining company which had once provided our town with much of its employment. It showed the layout of the mine in almost intimate detail. I focused on it, trailing my finger along the maze of corridors that made it up. "Hot damn," I said, smiling for the first time in days. "Aubrey, look, the mine goes all the way back to the other side of the mountain face. If we can get up to the entrance on our side, without being spotted, we could use it to get to the other side and down to the next town." She looked at what I had seen, then began to play with her hair, a sign of her nervously thinking. "But what if there's a collapse in one of the tunnels? It's been abandoned for at least 50 years. We don't know the conditions inside." I felt a small wave of uncertainty wash over me, then focused again. "We don't have any other choice, Aubrey. The sewers will likely be guarded, and the 2 roads out are blocked. This is our best chance to get out." After a moment of nervous thinking, she nodded. "Okay, you're right, but we'll have to be careful. They'll likely have someone patrolling up near the top of the mountain, if not a helicopter or plane. Plus, we need to keep from being seen by," she pointed up towards the ceiling. "By the satellites over us," I nodded. "We'll figure that out when we get back to our house," I responded, folding up the map and shoving it into my pocket. With our plan set, we made one final stop downtown. As risky as it was, something you guys suggested stuck in my head, so we made our way back to the diner's parking lot. Making sure to stay hidden, we made our way to the Nolte's Jeep. I wanted to check and see if they had kept a set of spare keys inside, so we could stop by their home on the way up the mountain and see if there would be anything useful to take. I searched everywhere, not finding anything in the glove box or the center console. "Damn it," I whispered. "Aubrey, there's nothing in here." There was no answer behind me. "Aubrey?" Still nothing. Fear suddenly fell over me as though someone had poured a bucket of ice water onto my head. Jumping out of the Jeep, I moved quickly to the back of the truck. As I came around the corner, I saw a flash of movement approaching me. "Oh, fuck!" I didn't even have a chance to reach for the gun or raise the blade. A large, meaty hand wrapped itself around my throat, and I felt myself being lifted off my feet. The metal and rubber of the Jeep's spare tire slamming into my back, and my vision blurred for a moment. A cry of fear and panic rang out. "Aubrey!" Blinking my eyes rapidly, I focused on my attacker. Mr. Nolte snarled into my face, a large cut adorning one cheek where someone had cut him trying to defend themselves. My eyes flashed down to see what he held in his other hand. It was the sword that I'd seen another man wielding that first day that this had all begun. Evidently, it had either been dropped and recovered, or Mr. Nolte had killed him for it. I saw him pull the arm holding it back, and I understood in one horrific realization that the man intended to run me through with it, pinning me to the back of the Jeep. I instinctively kicked out, aiming my left front foot for the man's wrist and praying my aim to be true. The first kick missed by inches, and I feared I wouldn't have time for a second, but it seemed that the insane man was relishing the moments before the kill, like I'm a deer he's about to take out. The thought made me kick out again with all my strength. Yes! My aim was dead on this time. As my foot connected with his wrist, I heard him let out a small grunt of pain as the sword fell from his grasp and clattered to the ground. Black spots began to appear in my vision from the lack of oxygen. As he turned to look to see where his weapon had fallen, I fumbled at my waistband for the pistol. My fingers slid on the rubber grips, then caught as I yanked it out. Mr. Nolte was turning back to see what I was doing as I aimed the gun towards him as best I could. I saw his eyes lock onto the weapon, pointing almost point blank at him. His arm began to reach out to grab it. I fired, pulling the trigger as hard as I could. Growing up in a relatively small, rural town, my parents had introduced me to guns at an early age. I had been taught firearm safety, and when I'd been old enough, Mom and Dad had taken me to the range for lessons. I had always been a decent shot. The instructor had been impressed, but I had never pointed a gun at another human being before. They always tell you, never aim a gun at anything or anyone you don't intend to shoot. I had seen crime shows about homicides before, seen fictionalized versions of shootings, watching shows like The Sopranos and Ozark, but nothing can prepare you for the real thing. Nothing can prepare you for actually shooting another person, affected or not. The sound of the shot filled my ears with what sounded like bells being rung directly next to my head, and the acrid smell of smoke reached my nostrils. I felt the grip on my throat loosen, and I fell back to my feet, almost falling from having been weakened by the choking. Mr. Nolte stumbled backwards a few feet, his hands going to his gut. A blossoming red stain spread out across his dirty white button-up shirt and over his fingers. He looked up at me, the momentarily surprised expression on his face morphing back into insane rage. I felt a sense of shock course through me. That would have put any ordinary person down. He let out a snarl and took another step towards me. With the space between us, though, I had a chance to lift the gun and aim properly. I didn't think, instead letting raw instinct take over me. I fired again. A large hole appeared just above his right eyebrow, and blood spattered the brick wall behind us. The force of the impact from the .45 round sent him flying backwards into a heap on the ground, and he lay still. For a split second I simply stood there, in a sort of daze. Then I remembered my friend. "Aubrey!" I called in a panic, looking around and afraid that I'd see her laying dead on the ground. But then a fresh course of panic flew through me. Aubrey lay on her back on the ground, wrestling with someone, a girl about our age. I realized it was Nicole, one of Aubrey's best friends. The two girls rolled around, Aubrey dodging and ducking as sharp nails were swung at her face. Again, letting instinct take over, I ran towards the pair of them. "Hey!" I shouted at Nicole. The people in town might have been changed by the signal in the emergency broadcast, but they still had some normal mannerisms, such as turning when being yelled at. I saw the look of fury lock onto me. Lashing out as hard as I could, I kicked her directly in the face. I'd put more power than I'd anticipated into it, and she rolled violently off Aubrey, who scrambled away, trying to get a letter opener out of her pocket. But I was already over the girl, who looked up at me with blind fury. "I'm sorry, Nikki," I said quickly, then pulled the trigger. The shot slammed into her, and after a few twitches, she lay limp and still on the asphalt. Not giving another second, I turned to Aubrey. "You okay?" I asked quickly, reaching out to help her up. She didn't say anything, only nodded as she took my hand and got to her feet. "Look, we've got to get out of here. The others surely heard that, and we don't have enough ammo to deal with all of them." As the words tumbled out of my mouth, a part of me deep inside screamed at me that these weren't just thems, but people I'd known from day one of my life. A part of me was horrified that I had just killed 2 people, people I'd known and spoken with and laughed with, but I blocked it out. Giving in to that emotion would collapse me to the ground, and dead in a matter of moments. Already, I could faintly hear the stomping of many feet from the main road approaching where we stood. I turned and gave Mr. Nolte's body a split-second look over. The ring of keys clipped to his belt glinted in the sunlight, and I quickly reached down and snatched them off the loop. Snatching up the paper cutter blade, we turned and ran for the alley. We reached it just in time as well. What I can only describe as half the fucking town swarmed into the diner's parking lot, smashing all the car windows and destroying everything in their path in order to try and find us. As we watched, we saw some of them turn and began slicing at each other. I saw Mrs. Delaney, our old biology teacher, jam a screwdriver into the neck of Carrie Shawcross, a high school dropout who had made his living selling the teens of town pot. "They're beginning to turn on each other," Aubrey whispered in my ear. I had to agree. Whatever the signal did to them, it must be starting to break down their minds. Still feeling slightly numbed from the shooting, I motioned for Aubrey to follow me. Together we turned away from the carnage unfolding across the street and quickly moved back to the residential side of town. It was a lot easier going where so many of the affected were behind us. As we drew close to Aubrey's house, a thought passed through me, and I stopped. After noticing that I wasn't with her anymore, she turned back to me. "What is it?" she asked. I took a deep breath, feeling a slight tremor begin in my hands. The adrenaline from the attack was fading away, and reality was beginning to settle back in. But still, the thought persisted. "I need to go to my house," I said. A look of confusion fell over her face. "What? Why?" I took another deep breath, trying to compose myself. "Before we try and leave, I have to—" My voice choked off, and I swallowed, willing it to not quake with emotion. "I have to get the photo in the living room, of me and my parents. I want something to remember them by." Understanding suddenly filled her features. She looked around for a second, as if assessing how dangerous it might be. "If you want, you can just go back to your house and wait for me," I continued. "I don't mind going alone, but I have to do this." She shook her head, seeming surprised at my words. "Eddie, don't you remember what you said to me the other day? We're not splitting up, no matter what." I almost burst into tears at her words. Knowing I wasn't alone in this made everything a tiny bit easier to take. I nodded gratefully. "Let's go get it, but we need to be quick," she added, and again I nodded. It took about 5 more minutes to make it from where we were to my backyard, but finally we stepped through the gate entrance to my backyard. I looked around, feeling like I was on an alien planet as I stared around at the place I had grown up playing in as a kid, what once seemed so normal. Not wanting to delay, though, I reached out, and pulling my house keys from my pocket, unlocked the door. It opened with the same soft creak it always had, and we both quickly stepped inside and shut the door. Leading the way through the kitchen, I stepped into the hallway connecting it to the front rooms. The house was silent as a tomb, both in a metaphorical sense and literal. I gripped the paper cutter arm tightly as the front door appeared. It stood slightly open, swinging back and forth in the slight breeze from outside. Taking a deep breath, I turned away from it to the doorway which led into the living room. I suddenly dropped the blade, letting it fall to the wooden floor with a clatter. The world contracted in my vision, and I felt as though I were experiencing tunnel vision. I couldn't see left or right, only straight ahead. Behind me, I vaguely heard Aubrey ask me something, then gasp in horror. But I didn't answer her. I honestly couldn't. All I could do was walk slightly into the room, my eyes trained on the sight before me. A pair of legs stuck out from behind our couch, the tacky one my mother had insisted on us buying 4 years ago. The couch was covered with red stains, ones that continued over the top and splashed against the wall behind it, smearing downward and out of sight. Khaki work pants now stained with blood were tucked into the tan work boots on the feet, the same boots I'd bought as a Christmas present last year. I still remember the pure joy I was filled with when the wrapping had been torn off, and a sentiment about how thoughtful it had been stated. I stared at the legs of my father for what felt like an eternity, not being able to move, not being able to feel anything except emptiness. Then I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find Aubrey staring at me, tears falling from her eyes. She pulled me into a hug, and for a few seconds, we simply stood like that in the middle of the living room. Finally, she pulled back. She didn't say anything, only nodded at me before stepping back. For that, I was thankful. No words would be able to help me right now. Feeling my vision clear, I focused instead on the task at hand, forcing myself not to look at the crumpled form of my father. I saw the photo I'd come for sitting on the coffee table next to my father's La-Z-Boy. It was one we'd taken when we'd gone to the Grand Canyon. The three of us posed with big smiles as we'd waited for the stranger we'd asked to help take our picture. It was the memory of them I wanted to remember, not this. Crossing to it, I picked it up, then slid open the back of the frame and pulled out the photograph from it. Giving it one last look, I folded it and slid it into my pocket. I turned around and found we were no longer alone in the house anymore. Aubrey had been too focused on me to notice the figure stepping in through the open front door, but at my gaze, she turned around, then rapidly backed up towards me until she stood next to me. The figure stepped into the living room. The platinum blonde hair was now, somehow, even dirtier and more covered with blood than it had been yesterday. Blood-filled eyes flickered between the two of us as the hand holding the knife twitched involuntarily. I heard Aubrey let out a gasp. Mom took another step towards us. I felt my heart begin to slam against my chest, tears forming at the corner of my eyes. "No, please, no, not this. Please don't make me do this." I had, in the heat of the moment, been able to kill the other two in order to keep Aubrey and me alive. But now, being faced with the person who had literally brought me into this world, I didn't feel, even to save my life, like I could pull the trigger. It didn't matter if she was changed or not. That's when she froze. For a moment, I stood confused and honestly terrified. Then she began to twitch, first gently, then violently. It was almost as if she were waging a war inside herself. That was when she spoke. It wasn't the voice I remembered. This seemed forced, as if it were taking a great effort to do. "Run! Edward! Run!" I felt my blood run cold as the words spoken. "She's still in there. Oh, God, no! I felt frozen to the spot, even as Aubrey began tugging on my arm, trying to pull me away. An explosion of movement suddenly came from her. She turned and leapt. Through the living room window. The glass shattered, the sound almost painful inside the house. For a split second, I saw my mother stand up from where she crouched on the front lawn. Cuts on her face from the glass had started to bleed profusely. She looked back towards us, and for a split second, I swear I saw a tear form on her cheek. Then she ran, heading back to the street and screaming. It sounded like a mixture of the insane rage I'd heard the affected make, with a soul-tearing anguish and heartbreak. Aubrey gripped my arm as we stared out the broken window. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Tears fell from my eyes freely, and my mind seemed to lock. Finally, she spoke. Why didn't she kill us? It took me a minute to answer her. I don't know, I finally answered her quietly. Maybe whatever happened is losing its effect. Maybe she just couldn't do it. I just don't know. I stared at the carpet, then felt her tug my arm gently. Come on, we need to go. We need to get ready to leave tonight. I took a deep breath, wiping the tears from my eyes, and then looked at her and nodded. Together, with her gently guiding me, we left my house for the last time and made our way back to hers. When we returned, I set about keeping myself busy by making some last-minute checks to our gear. Aubrey went upstairs to grab some final things, and for a moment I was left alone. As I waited for her to return, a sudden burst of static suddenly came from the open basement door behind me. It was the ham radio. I turned and heard a voice speaking, but it was too far away to hear properly. Aubrey, the radio! I called out. She came scrambling downstairs, holding onto a few items which she'd dropped next to our packs. Together, we stampeded for the basement door, nearly falling over ourselves as we got downstairs. As we reached the bottom, though, I saw her freeze solid on the second-to-last step. Aubrey, what is it? I asked her, worried, then froze myself as I heard it.
Aubrey, honey, are you there?
The voice was one I'd recognized. It belonged to Aubrey's father, but it wasn't coming from anywhere upstairs. It was coming from the ham radio. It crackled again.
Aubrey, sweetheart, I know you're in the house. If you can hear me, please respond.
She turned and looked up at me, a look of shock melting away into relief. Thank God they're okay, she squealed. I felt a small pit form in my stomach as I thought about my parents, but I also felt genuine relief wash over me. I'm glad someone who lived here was spared this hell. Plus, if they're still outside of town, then maybe they'll be able to help us. We may not have to hike out of here. Answer it, I urged, and together we ran to the radio set. Aubrey slammed down the transmit button. Daddy, I'm here, she cried into the microphone. Mr. Carmody's voice answered immediately.
Oh, thank God. I didn't know if you'd have the radio set on, but I know my little girl. I told your mother that she'd remember the emergency procedures we'd taught you.
That's a strange way to put things, I thought, but pushed the thought away. Everything normal felt strange right now. Aubrey hit the button again. Yes, I remembered. Oh, Daddy, you won't believe what's happened here. It's horrible. People are killing each other. Something happened when the broadcast test went off. There are people, I don't know who, blocking all of the exits. They've said that something will happen in less than 2.5 days. You have to help, please. For a moment there was silence, and I wondered if the people we'd heard on the radio had heard the radio signal and jammed it. Then her father's voice came again.
Honey, I need you to listen carefully. I need to ask you a question. Are you alone?
I saw Aubrey stand up in a straight reaction to the question. A look of confusion passed over her face. It was one I know I mirrored. I felt a strange emotion settle over me, but I couldn't place it. Still, Aubrey leaned down and tapped the microphone. No, I'm not. Eddie's with me. We've helped each other survive the last few days. She continued to hold down the transmit button, and then finished speaking. Why?" There was silence again for a few moments, and then I heard Mr. Carmody sigh. Then he spoke, his voice suddenly flat and almost emotionless.
"I was afraid of that,"
he said simply. Aubrey's brow furrowed, and she and I exchanged a look. She spoke again into the mic. "Daddy, why did you just say that?" Silence again. Then the same flat tone.
"Sweetheart, you need to listen to me carefully. This may be difficult for you to do, but you have to leave him."
Shock passed over both our faces. "Daddy, what the hell are you talking about?" she demanded. But I was already beginning to piece together something in my mind. Something I didn't want to think about. But as the jigsaw pieces came together, it made too much sense. The radio crackled again.
"Aubrey, do you remember when I said that I couldn't talk about my work?"
Another confused look shot through my friend's face. Inside my head, another piece fit into the puzzle. Aubrey's parents left town the morning everything happened. They were the only ones that left. Aubrey's father never told her what he did for a living. Aubrey's dad was... Scientist, I breathed out, feeling my insides begin to boil as the picture became clear. Aubrey turned towards me, then stabbed the microphone again. "Daddy, that makes no sense as to what..." She suddenly trailed off. I saw the look of realization pass over her face. First of shock, then horror. And then, finally, anger. She hit the transmit button so hard I thought it would break. "Are you a part of the people who caused this?" she demanded, her voice rising to almost a yell of rage. Mr. Carmody answered immediately.
"Sweetheart, I know you'll never understand, but we have to do things, horrible things, create horrible things, in order to keep this country safe. If we don't make them, others will, and they'll use it on us. That is what my job is, to create things before others do. It may sound terrible, I know, but you'll understand when you get older. It's why your mother and I devoted our lives to this cause."
My rage began to boil over, and I lost control of my emotions. I sprinted forward, pushing Aubrey out of the way and stabbing at the transmit button. "You motherfucker!" I screamed. "You just killed over 1,000 fucking people! Turned half of them into killing machines! Men, women, fucking children! My parents! All for a fucking experimental weapons test? You piece of shit! You're both fucking evil!" I let go of the button. Mr. Carmody's voice answered immediately, this time cold, callous.
"It's for the greater good, son. You may never understand it, but some sacrifices have to be made. The few have to suffer and die in order to keep many safe. That's the price we pay."
He spoke again, this time to Aubrey.
"Aubrey, you have to do one of two things right now. You have to either leave Eddie behind, or kill him. You are the only one allowed to leave town alive. Nobody else can. It's too much of a security risk."
For a minute, both of us just stood there, staring at each other. I felt my shoulders hunch. All the anger and fight flowed out of me. I felt a terrible emotion fall on me, replacing the anger. Hopelessness. I'm not going to get out of here alive. Finally, I spoke. "Go." She twisted towards me, her face still a mask of confusion and anger. "What?" she breathed. I motioned, leaning back into the cold concrete wall. "We're not both making it out of here." I motioned to the radio. "You heard. They'll never let anyone else but you leave alive." I shook my head. "I'm not going to condemn you to die here as well. You're my friend. I care about you. I don't want to see you die as well. Just go. Please. And please, don't forget about me, okay?" I felt fresh tears fall from my eyes. Accepting that you're going to die is something that people always say is never easy. I had planned out my life, going to college, having a family, living a long life. And now, it had been taken away from me as if I'd been told I had a terminal illness. But I couldn't be so selfish as to want to have the only person I cared about left alive to die with me. I looked up to see a look of shock on Aubrey's face, Tears were falling from her cheeks. Then they stopped. Her face hardened. Without saying a word to me, she crossed to the radio and hit the transmit button. No! I felt my jaw drop open. What? Mr. Carmody's voice answered immediately.
Aubrey, you don't have a choice. Do as I say.
She hit the button again. Go to hell, Dad. I'm not leaving him. The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't her father that spoke. It was the deep voice of the man in charge, who'd we'd heard the last 2 days.
This is General Brighton. Young lady, I'm giving you one final chance. You are ordered to either leave your companion behind, or you will die along with the rest of the town. You have 30 seconds to choose.
Despite the mixed emotions in me, I felt a chill roll through me at his words. Aubrey, I began, but she cut me off, raising a hand to silence me as she hit the transmit button. General, with all due respect, fuck you, sir. The radio was silent for a minute. Then the general spoke again.
So be it. Sergeant Deacons, scramble our frequencies remaining on the airwaves, and station double the number of sentries at all known exits. Move up the final phase to T-minus 11 hours. Anyone approaches, you kill them. Am I clear?
The other voice spoke up.
Roger that, sir. Initializing scrambling in 20 seconds.
There was a burst of static, and then Aubrey's father spoke again, this time softly.
I'm sorry, Aubrey. I wish you understood.
His voice trailed off, but didn't come again. A sharp burst of static made me clap my hands over my ears, and then the radio went silent. Dead. Aubrey turned to me, her face set in a determined anger. Before I could say anything, she spoke. I'm not leaving you, Eddie. We're going to make it out of here together, or die trying. We're going to get to the mine shaft, and if we get out of here... I cut her off. When? She nodded. When we get out of here, we're going to find a way to make them pay. She began to march upstairs. Get everything ready. We're leaving tonight once it gets dark. That's where we are now. I'm sitting next to the back door typing this out. I'm not sure if the jammer will have stopped even the satellite uplink by now, but it seems like it's working. So, I'm going to post this, and then wait. Once it gets truly dark, we're going to make a break for the top of town. We're going to find a way into the woods where they can't see us. We're going to make our way up to the mine shaft, using the branch method one of you suggested to ease our tracks, and we're going to escape this nightmare, once and for all. I'm not going to ask you for any advice this time. You've helped us survive to now, and I'll never be able to thank you enough for that. You're a huge reason why we're still alive. But now, this part we have to do on our own. Hopefully, when I write tomorrow, it'll be from somewhere far away from here. But if you don't hear from me, it means we didn't make it. And if we don't, thank you, anyways. Aubrey's motioning for me to get ready. Wish us luck.